Hey, this is Don from Padlock Technologies once again with another question here. You guys are starting to send me a lot of these things, so I appreciate you guys engaging with me. And let's start with this question here. So the question is about ICE, and is AD the only external identity store that you can use to authenticate users? And the answer is no, right? AD is the main one that like most people use. And they can use it for, Pete with MS Chat V2, which is username and password, which I am 100% against if you have one thing in your network. And the other one is certificates. Obviously, I'm going to pick certificates because that's ETLS. Now you can do something called Pete with ETLS. Pete would be the outer method. ETLS would be the inner method. Peep MS Chat V2, same thing. Peep's the outer method. MS Chat V2 is the inner method. And then they have Teep, which you can do this thing called EAP chaining, which you basically can tie machine authentication and user authentication in one EAP session. So that's just a quick rundown of the different protocols you can use. You can also use EAP fast, but there's no point in using that anymore because of Teep. And then you could do EAP TTLS, which is not really that secure. So I wouldn't use TTLS, but that used to be what they used to do with when you did Entra ID integration. They don't do that anymore. So you can use AD mainly, but with everything now going to the cloud, you don't have to use AD. Now, if you're using certificate-based authentication, there are two ways you can technically. One's going to involve a CA server. You're going to have that. And then the other one's going to be an online CA like Skepman, basically. So in ICE, right, when you're doing certificate-based authentication, you just have to have the entire trust chain. Meaning, if you have a CA, sub CA, or intermediate CA, whatever you want to call it, you need to trust those CA certificates. So the root and the intermediate and the sub CAs. You got to trust that, right? Same thing if you use Skepman, you need to usually Skepman just gives you a root certificate. You need to import that into the trust store. And then when you get your certificates from Skepman, usually through some kind of onboarding process, if you go into Intune, you create your profiles for wired and wired and your certificate profiles. And then when you push it to the device, it'll get the root CA, it'll get its own certificate and all that good stuff. And then when you go to authenticate with ICE, you're just going to check certain values in that certificate. I usually use the OU or the organizational unit. That's kind of the easier one to manipulate. So let's say you wanted to do something like BYOD. Somebody would go through the onboarding process using the corporate app, Microsoft corporate app. And then they would download the certificate, get the root chain and all that stuff. But the OU would say BYOD. And then in ICE, I would say if the certificate OU equals or contains BYOD, then they get this access. Is the same thing with, non-domain join machines. You can say this is, Intune as the OU. And then you say, well, if the OU equals Intune, then give them this access. So that's another way you can kind of authenticate users without using on-prem AD. Now, certificate connector, you're going to have a CA and an NDES. So it has to be a CA and NDES server. They usually put them on the same box, and then you put the cert connector on there. That cert connector goes to Intune, and then you create your policies and profiles from there, right? And you obviously got to upload the CA certificate and intermediates to do the proper trust chain, because when you use certificate, it's all about the trust chain. So hopefully that answers your question. You do not have to use AD. You can even do username and password with Entra ID. Honestly, you can connect it through there with, I think it's REST API, connect it up to Entra ID, get your groups from Entra ID, and you do username and password. If you wanted to do that from there, you can say, hey, if they're a part of this group, do this. If they're a part of this group, do this. If you want to do that. Secure certificates are more secure, so I would always highly suggest do not use username and passwords because they can be compromised, they can be stolen, stuff like that. But I think I did a comparison video of MS Chat V2 versus certificates. Always go certificates. If you don't have a CA, build a CA, push out the user and computer certificates, push those out, take care of the supplicants first, and then you can always, authenticate and authorize on the back end with those certificates. So this is Don with Padlock Technologies. Hopefully that answers your question. Hopefully this was informative. Thank you. Have a nice day.